Hey everybody, John from Bike Fit Advisor. So we're going to talk about balance on the bike today. And balance is a tough place to get to on the bike for a lot of folks. Even when people go out and buy a bike that's similarly sized to the one that they were just riding, I get a lot of folks in here that complain that something just still feels off. So with balance, a lot goes into it. We have to, of course, consider your actual bike fit, where you contact the bike. Of course, that's what we're going to talk a lot about today. But the geometry of the bike factors in here as well. If you think about it, the seat angle, the head angle, the wheelbase of the bike, the rake of the fork, and then the resultant trail that exists of this bike, all those things are going to affect the balance. But of course, we want to focus on what we can control and also what's the focus of this channel, which is the bike fit and where you're contacting it. And quite frankly, when you have an existing bike, you can't control the geometry at that point at all anyway. So we'll talk about a little bit about that in the later part of the video here about what to look for, but first things first. So fortunately, there is a slight shortcut or a secret to balance on the bike. And I can sum it up in one basic measurement. Now, it doesn't encompass everything, but it encompasses a lot. And that has to do with where are your hips relative to your feet on the bike. And we're talking about the fore-aft distance between these 2 points, the horizontal distance between these 2 points. In a simpler way, since our feet are turning around in circles, you could think of it as where are your hips relative to the bottom bracket. So why is this single measurement so determinative? Well, I talked about this in an old video, but it bears repeating. So it has to do with some really basic physics, actually. When we're pushing against the pedals, they're pushing back against us, the whole equal and opposite reaction thing. Because our hips are above our feet when we're pedaling, when we're on a standard bike, of course, those pedals are pushing back against us. And since our feet are below us, the feet are actually exerting a force on the hips that is upwards. And this is what causes and helps us with unweighting on the saddle. When we look at our saddle pressure, this is actually a very beneficial thing. This is what causes the reciprocal loading and unloading that we see on a saddle pressure. The next thing is because our hips are behind our feet, or in this case, we're talking about the bottom bracket, but because they're behind our feet, when we're pushing against those pedals pushing it back against us, that is exerting a force on our hips and pelvis that is rearward in direction. It is pushing our hips and pelvis back on the saddle. It is actually keeping our pelvis in place, locating it on the saddle in a more rearward position, and preventing it from rolling or sliding or translating forward. This too is really beneficial. We need this force. We need this to provide that stability to the pelvis to prevent it from rolling forward. The result of it is it helps keep excess weight off of our hands because we can actually stabilize and bear some of that weight through the pelvis in a stable way. So then the next question is how far back behind the bottom bracket should our hips be? There's a lot that goes into this. Something that's really easy to grasp is it's going to be dependent on how big you are, how tall you are, how short you are, how long your legs are, especially the upper leg or the femur. Those are going to be big determinants of how far back behind your bottom bracket those hips need to be. Additionally, your preferred or your necessary posture, I should say, on the bike. If you have limited flexibility and core stability in general, then on the bike, you're likely going to need a slightly more upright posture. Because this is going to throw less of your body weight forward, you might be able to get away with having the hips slightly further forward than average. But however, if you do better with a more aggressive position where the torso is more steeply angled, then you're likely going to need a little bit more rearward positioning of the hips behind the bottom bracket, get this stability built into it. So when we're answering that question of how far behind the bottom bracket should our hips be, rather than focusing on a hard number, it would be great to get to, and it is something I want to dig into a little bit more and do a future video on. It's also not the easiest thing for people to measure in an effective way. And so we're better off kind of going about this in a functional way. So here's what I would do. We're going to take the simplest example as our starting point. So let's say you're riding a road or a gravel bike, and it is pretty much out of the box built up in a very standard way. You have between like a 90 and 110 millimeter stem on the bike. Your saddle is clamped in the middle of the rails on a setback seat post that has 15 millimeters of setback. And this is the way you've been riding the bike. And let's assume even further that you don't have major problems on the bike, but you have that vague sense of like, something just feels off. Like you're just not quite connected to the bike. Incidentally, having significant symptoms like saddle discomfort, excess weight on your hands, strain, tension, and discomfort through the neck and upper back. These are definitely symptoms and hallmarks that can benefit. If hip position is a part of the problem, then making and doing this test can be even more effective for you because it's not guaranteed, but it's very likely a portion of the problem. So assuming all this, the simplest test is basically to take your saddle where it currently sits, and we're going to move it rearward. We're going to move it posteriorly up to a centimeter. You don't have to move a full centimeter. I wouldn't move more than a centimeter though. And at the same time, you're going to shorten the stem by one level, which is usually a centimeter. So what we've effectively done is not increased the reach of the bike, because that's adding an additional variable to this situation. So we've maintained the reach of the bike for the most part, and we've just taken your upper body weight distribution and moved it backwards on the bike a little bit. And then what I would do is go out for a couple of rides. I would definitely give it more than one ride. I think if it's tolerable, or if it's actually improving, of course, verify it with 2 to 5 rides, I would say. I would definitely give it more than one though. And that's whether you're ruling it in or ruling it out. If you notice that you have better connection to the bike, you feel better located on the saddle and you're not slipping around as much, you have less weight on your hands, even just that vague sensation of I just feel a little bit better or more connected to the bike, or it just feels a little easier to ride or handle, or, any of those things, this is a beneficial adjustment for you. And we really don't have to make it more complicated than that. Just changing this one parameter and testing it out with actual rides is generally the most effective way to go. Now, if it didn't help you at all and you did 2, 3, 4 rides and did not notice 1 ounce of difference, then you can go back to where you were and we have to go a different direction clearly. In addition to doing this and just going for a ride, you could also do a balance test that I did a video on a while back, and you could do it before you make the change and after you make the change and see if it improves anything for you. And incidentally, that video, I will be revisiting that and redoing it a little bit, but that might be useful as well. So what you're going to find is that a lot of this is going to be dependent on how well the bike is sized for you. So let's take another hypothetical. Let's say you have the bike, it's set up for you with a 70 millimeter stem. Your saddle is pushed forward on the rails and the seat post is actually had to be changed to a 0 setback seat post. Now you did these things because you were trying to mitigate symptoms like maybe hand pressure or numbness or saddle discomfort, these types of things. In this position, you certainly could take that saddle, since it's pushed forward, you can certainly push it backwards. Ostensibly, you made these corrections for a reason and to mitigate some other symptoms. And so, yes, you could push that saddle back, but that's going to increase the reach. And quite frankly, with a 70 millimeter stem, you're going to struggle to get the bars back close enough sometimes. Even finding a 60 millimeter stem to work for your bike can be a challenge. Even going from an 80 to a 70 can be a challenge with certain bikes. So these hallmarks I described with the saddle pushed forward and the short stem already on there are kind of hallmarks of a bike that's too big for you. Bikes that are too big are a giant impediment to balance. And the reason is, quite frankly, is when the bike is too big, most people will address the reach by moving the saddle forward first, because it is the easiest thing to do and it's the cheapest thing to do. We don't need to change any parts. After that, they might shorten the stem, but sometimes we've gone too far. And moving that saddle forward in a lot of cases does put our hips too close to or too far over the bottom bracket to have adequate balance. And of course, if you were to preferentially maintain your hip position and keep the hips back, now you sometimes can't shorten the stem enough to make the reach adequate. This is part of the reason why you may have heard me reference in the past that even a bike that is moderately too small is easier to fit than a bike that's a little bit too big. A bike that's too small, we can usually make it bigger pretty easily by moving the saddle back and maybe lengthening the stem. And these have a much less pronounced negative effect on the handling of the bike. When we go to shorten everything and we put our weight into the middle of the bike, this definitely affects the handling of the bike quite a lot more. So again, we'll talk about this more in the future. I'm going to dig in and try and get some data to kind of present on trying a simple way to maybe measure this hip to bottom bracket positioning. But in the meantime, if you're struggling with something like this, try this really basic adjustment of moving the hips back, shortening the stem to maintain your reach, and testing it out. See if having your weight a little further back solves any of the problems for you. If you are looking for a new bike, then doing some of the legwork on the front end and really making sure that you get a bike that isn't too big is of the utmost importance. So that's it for this one. Thanks everybody for joining me, and I will see you on the next one.